Psalms 9 and 10, way back in the Old Testament, are often considered that they should go together because David definitely wrote the one. We're not sure about Psalm 10, but he definitely wrote Psalm 9. And Psalm 10 verse 1 says this: "Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" I'm sure if you've been a Christian for a while, you've asked this question. Or even if you're looking in at the Christian faith, you sometimes ask that question: if you're God and so loving and you claim to be loved, why is it that I don't feel loved always? Or often I don't experience your presence. Or maybe if you're an Australian rugby player and you're playing Ireland, you say, "Oh God, where have you been?" Or if you're a French rugby player, the New Zealanders took you 3-1 and you're wondering, where is God? Or you're a South African and England took the last game. Or the Soccer World Cup. Are there any African teams left in the Soccer World Cup, friends? Who's there? Nigeria's still there. Senegal's still there. So 2 top teams still pressing in. I think Tunisia were knocked out recently. So it's a tough contest, isn't it? But life is tough. And it's often a competition. And as you go up the ladder or wherever you go, there are those that are often better. And if you're a believer in the world and life gets difficult, maybe you ask this question: where are you, God, in times of trouble? Where are you? I've called on your name, or I've called on you on behalf of my family. And so we've got these realities of sometimes our lives are full of joy, but sometimes there's sadness. Sometimes we experience Christian victory, and sometimes we feel defeated as believers, or whether you're an unbeliever. Sometimes there's peace in the home, or peace in your heart, or peace in your life, but sometimes there's hostility. And so we've got this opportunity, I think, to look at our old friend, the doubt continuum. The doubt continuum. I know it's not as quite as clear as it should be, but it's a kind of a, what do you call these things that go up like that and down? Our mathematician? Parabola, eh? Is it? Is it a parabola? Anyway, so it starts off small here, and it does this little... So the dotted line in the middle, if you can read it down here, is believing God by trusting in Jesus Christ. That's the dotted line in the middle. And research tells us that Christians, most Christians, are in this big center. So this slightly on the left or slightly on the right. So these would be, this is where unbelieving doubt is just to the left of the line, and believing doubt is on the right. And so many believers are in this area of believing doubt. And so, what does believing doubt mean? It means that there was a stage in your life when you had absolute certainty about God, right on the right-hand side. You're not a skeptic right here on the left. You've moved from unbelieving doubt, but there was a time when you felt God was close, and then trouble came, and you prayed, and doubt crept in. Or you became, or you listened to an atheist speak, or agnostic, and they sounded convincing. Or you listened to a scientist, and he said, well, science just cannot mix with faith. And or you looked at the emerging generation, and it looks like they're doing so well without God. You began to question things in your life. And so that's the reality of believing doubt on the right. And my hope today, again, is that you're going to take a step to the right. Wherever you are, you're going to take a step to the right. And the reality is, for David in the Old Testament, there were times of difficulty, and he was calling on God. And so we think he wrote Psalms 9 and 10 in the period when he was on the run from Saul. And there was struggle in his life. God had anointed his life, and then there was difficulty and pain and struggle. Imagine that. Imagine that all going on in your life at that time. So we're going to look at a story in Mark's Gospel, and it's well known. But just to set the context briefly in Mark's Gospel, we know that Mark's Gospel was written around 65 to 75 AD. So what was going on in that time? Well, there's this war going on between the Romans and the Christians. And at 70 AD, the temple has fallen. So if you're a Christian in this time and you know Jesus and you walked with Jesus, I mean, you're starting to ask questions, right? Our people are getting killed. The temple has fallen. Where is God in times of trouble? If there ever was a time to call out, it was then. And there's this new ruler that's risen to power in Rome. His name is Vespasian. And Vespasian was a powerful guy. In fact, most of the Roman emperors invited worship, didn't they? They claimed to be God. And there was something going around at the time called Vespasian propaganda. And he was just In fact, he believed he was the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. He believed that he was the Messiah. He believed that he was, although he had no Jewish roots, he just believed God had put him in place to rule the nations. That was Rome's, claim to fame. And so, if you're a Christian, and remember the persecution that was going on at the time through this time of, between 65 and 75. And so you're asking questions, and a lot of people believe that Mark's gospel was written to refute the claims of Vespasian. And so when he starts off, he's got no little, soppy little birth narrative. He's got no little baby Jesus, meek and mild. His Jesus comes on the scene, powerful, taking down darkness, and moving right into the realm. And so, he emerges as this one who opposes Vespasian and all his claims. So, does God really exist? Who really needs God anyway? I mean, if you've got Roman power and authority, the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, who really needs God anyway? Just like modern day atheism, popular atheism. I mean, if you believe in Jesus, if you believe in Jesus that he walked on water, I mean, who are you really? In a postmodern world of scientific claim, I mean, if you believe that Jesus walked on water, hey? And so doubt starts to creep in. So just as these things were happening back in that day, so they're happening today. Today of technology and science and progress and modern discoveries, advances, surely that's enough. Do we really need God? But friends, appearances can be deceiving, can't they? Appearances can really be deceiving. And it's a legitimate question sometimes to ask, where are you with God? And sometimes, God, why do you stand far off? And God, why do you seem to be hiding yourself in trouble? So, Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 41. You know the story well. Jesus has been out there with the crowds, and then he gets his disciples together and he says, let's go over to the other side. He says, let's go over to the other side. What does he mean when he says, let's go over to the other side? He says, guys, we're going to move out of our little comfort zone. We're going to over the lake to the other side, which is the Decapolis, which is where all the heavy stuff and the big dudes live and have their place. It's where the old Philistines were kicked out and they started these new tribes. And they, in a sense, the armies there, they had pigs as their emblems. So if you're a Jew and you had to go to the other side, it wasn't a happy invitation. But Jesus would do this from time to time. He'd say, come on, boys and girls, let's go to the other side. Let's go to the other side. And you never know what happens when you go to the other side. And so really when Jesus is inviting you to go to the other side, it's an invitation to visit that doubt continuum. It's an invitation to go with Jesus and see how he works and lives and has he's been. Because one of the things, and in particular Vespasian and the Roman emperors claim, is that they had power over nature. They were God ordained, and therefore the lightning and thunder and just nature itself was under their power. That's what they believed. They were God on earth. And so when Jesus said, let's go to the other side, it was an invitation to think, where do you stand in your Christian faith? When I read this again, let's go over to the other side, I couldn't help but thinking I was a time down in J-Bay and had this courage to go and surf out in J-Bay, which is not often, because it's a hectic place to go surfing. But the waves was kind of medium small, and I got up some courage, and I'm surfing out there. And then there's this old veteran guy. He's well known in J-Bay. I don't know what his name is, but he's an oldish guy. He surfs with a helmet on, and he's got a longboard, and he's got a proper helmet. And so I'm sitting in the water, and I sort of think I'm at if you've got the inside track, you get the right to the wave. And he sort of paddles up next to me, and he looks at me and smiles. He's the local. You can see it in his blood, in his body. And he's the local. And so I've got sort of the right of way, and this nice sort of wave comes along. It's a little bit wide. And he just looks at me, and he looks at me. I'm on the inside. I should be going first. He just looks at me and he says, let's all go. And there's a whole bunch of everyone. And suddenly I find we're all on this thing together. But it was great fun. And I'm surfing behind him, and he's in front of me with his helmet, and he's this old, cool dude, you know. He just lays himself back, and he goes cruising down. This is how he surfs. He just lays, and he's not worried about anybody else. Doesn't matter. This is him. He's the local man. It's always an experience when you join others. Hey, let's go over to the other side. You never quite know what it's going to hold. But there's fun and there's learning. And certainly for the disciples, they were learning this contrast between an earthly worldview and God's worldview. Because what happened as they start going across? A furious squall came up. Waves broke over the boat, and they were nearly swamped. Who initiated this journey? Jesus did. Jesus did. He said, let's go over to the other side. And friends, you know what it's like. You start walking with God, and suddenly there's hostility. Suddenly you feel overwhelmed. Suddenly you feel threatened by life or by very clever intellectual people. You start questioning your faith. You start doubting. And the waves broke over the boat. And it's a furious squall. It's almost as if this storm has got anger in it. And so, friends, we meet in the middle of the storm, the sovereign, sleeping God in the middle of the storm. And he appears disinterested. He appears unconcerned. He appears uncaring. But, friends, appearances can be deceiving, can't they? Because Jesus is in the stern of the boat, and he's on a pillow. He's got his head on the pillow. And he appears to be uncaring. Unloving. Just like we ask this question, Lord, where are you when I call out in my trouble? Why do you seem so distant? Why do you seem so far off in the middle of my trouble and my struggle and my questioning about life and where I'm going and what are the real? We meet the sovereign sleeping God who appears disinterested. And again, it's this claim that these Roman so-called strong people with all their armies and all their power, and there's this little rustic rabbi called Jesus. He's asleep in the boat. And so they ask that question, don't you? Jesus, do you really care about what's going on in my life? When Jesus appears to be silent, and Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. And so, friends, is he sleeping because he does not care about the disciples? Is he sleeping because he doesn't care about what's going on in your life and mine? Or is he sleeping because he knows who is actually in control of all of life? The appearances really can be deceiving. He's in control of, he knows who's in control of his life. He knows the Father. He knows what's going on in the life of his disciples. And just like those today who appear to be doing so well without God, appearances can be deceiving, hey? It seems like they've got everything together. So lovely on Friday to be part of Dave and Pat's wedding. And you know well that they're no longer too young. Pat is in her mid-50s, and she just stood up and shared at the wedding, and she just said, when Dave and I met, we were in an incredibly difficult place. Both of them in an incredibly difficult place. The loss of a spouse on the one side, after a long, hard illness,